Welcome back to another episode of Leadership Synergized. Dr. Vince Bertram joins us again. Last week, Dr. Bertram spent time talking about his vision and views of where education is at for our children and the challenges we all have. And as Dr. Bertram so eloquently and correctly stated, it's not a us versus them thing. It's all of us in that regard. We're all a part of the opportunities to grow and improve our educational programming and systems. Dr. Bertram, welcome back, and thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, I'm pleased to be back with you, Kevin. Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Bertram, we wrapped up last week's session. You were talking about serving those that know about what's going on. You've had an illustrious career, a number of roles to where you've worked and grown your skill sets with a focus on expanding the impact and growth for others. What's some of the things that you would recommend those who are early in their leadership careers today take into account when they're looking to serve self and grow their skills, their values, so they can multiply more opportunities to others?
Yeah, it's a great question, Kevin. My single most important piece of advice is never stop learning. Okay? Always be open to new ideas, new ways of thinking, and also just find it from places that you might not expect, okay? But just constantly learn, whether it's clear academic pursuits or simply conversation with people and learning from them. I think it's absolutely critical.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Bertram. And I would offer to build with that piece that some of the barriers that I've created for myself. And the great thing about reaching certain phases of life is you can reflect back and the fog's gone. You understand where you got in your own way. That's happened to me a great deal in that regard. But going into conversations, chance to learn from others, as an example, maybe having a predetermined or prejudgment about how a conversation is going to go, or even disengaging from a conflict that's meant to create the best possible solution moving forward. And individuals, I think, that are the most successful leaders really have to become comfortable in those aspects to where, yeah, maybe there's been a conflict or varying opinion with another or other teams in the past, but that shouldn't stop from learning and growing in the current moment, the current need.
Yeah, I agree with that. Sometimes when we go into conversations, I'll give you an example. I have my own political views of the world, right? And some of my closest friends, their views are the absolute opposite of mine. But I learn from them. And there are many ways that they've opened my perspective, my eyes to a different way of thinking. And sometimes we believe that changing our minds is in some way a negative thing. Right? I believe it's a very mature thing. Okay? To say and to acknowledge it, to call it out, to say, you've given me something to think about. And I've heard, and I'll use politics just for a moment, not to get into politics as an example. I've seen people in debates be challenged because 3 years ago, you said this. Now you're saying that. And for someone to say, yeah, I changed my mind. Okay? We don't give people the room to do that. Okay? In some way, that's supposed to be, that's a criticism of someone. I would say it's mature. Okay, the willingness to understand. And what I have found last week when we were talking about this issue of going to talk to people, that becomes in many ways defining moments. Like when you go to the place and you have conversations with people that are affected by certain things, you can see it for yourself. It can change our entire paradigm about any kind of topic we have. In some cases, it reinforces it, but oftentimes it opens us up to a new way of thinking.
It reminds me of Dr. John Maxwell. One of the things I love that he's written and and has been quoted with is just simply it's so important for leaders to walk slowly through the crowd. Don't I take that as don't enter the crowd as if you already know everything you need to know, or that you only want to go from the door to your table. Take the opportunity to meet and to understand, perhaps, or follow up on questions and conversations that you hear. And to your point, if I'm looking back at Kevin at age 20 and Kevin at age 64, my opinions have changed quite a bit. My views have changed quite a bit, and I'm thankful for that.
Yes. They change between 54 and 64.
Yeah.
They do. Right? And being open to that. It's not, you're not acquiescing. You're not ambivalent about these things, right? You're in a place where as we gain experience, right, we see things differently. Okay? And as a result, we do change our minds. And it's okay to acknowledge them. Okay? And that's where I think from a political standpoint, sometimes people get criticized because of that. Which one are you? I was there last year.
Yeah.
I changed my mind. So anyway, that's where I from an organizational standpoint, from a leadership standpoint, just engaging conversations, talking with people, presenting things to them. Here's a problem. What are your thoughts on it? And it's amazing the kind of insight you can get.
Absolutely. And as you're talking, I'm looking at my backdrop and still in the eye and reflecting that many leadership experts, John Maxwell and others, really go to the point when they define leadership that it's all about influence. And then I think about how the world has changed when, as a leader, influencing those around you, your organization. But personally, I would also say there's value in understanding and clearly, very clearly accepting the fact that you've got to influence self if you're going to be effective to grow and influence those around you. Share a bit about your experiences on challenges or where you've seen influence work effectively, positively, or not.
I think what you described is really the essence of leadership. There are people who have absolute power and absolute authority that can direct people to do things that they want them to do and expect them to do. There aren't very many of those situations, though. People always have the opportunity to reject it. And in those situations, it really comes with influence and ability and what people are looking for in leadership, people they can believe in. From my perspective, one of the greatest attributes of a leader is having vision. And imagining what the future could look like, and then helping people see it. Right? And then motivating people to pursue that new vision or that new paradigm. All very important. I think back throughout my career, and I've made tons of mistakes. Okay? From places where perhaps I believed that just direct people to go do things. And then you realize even if they do, even if they comply with it, the end result isn't even close to what you're hoping for because they didn't go into it believing in what they were doing. They did it because they thought they needed to or had to. Okay? And I've had a number of those situations that have occurred. I've learned a lot from them. And really just take a step back. And part of it is I'm impatient. I want to get things done. I don't want to wait 2 weeks when I can get it done in 2 days. Okay? And the speed in which you do that, if you're not taking people with you, okay, if you're doing it past them and wanting everyone to keep up or pick it up, you find that you're much better off taking the 2 weeks. Okay? You're going to get there actually much faster because you don't have to clean everything up. Okay? You don't have to backtrack trying to figure out where did I mess up. Okay? So I've learned a lot and through those experiences, and you try not to repeat them, but I've repeated them too. But it's okay, that I shouldn't have done that.
I'm there too.
I know. Hey, I did it again.
Absolutely. You bring up a word that we hear a lot about, education and all industries, and that's vision. And one of the, as you alluded to, one of the responsibilities of any leader is to align that vision in, through, and out of their organization. But yet, at times, leaders make decisions that their team members can reflect on, and they're asking, how does that relate to the vision as I understand it in that piece? Talk about what has worked in your organizations when you've been successful, your team's been successful with alignment of vision. What's made it work and allow it to stick for your companies or your teams?
Yeah, great question. One of the things that I have always been a believer in is experimentation.
Hmm.
I just think it's really important to test, to challenge our thinking, to try new things. And many of those things that we may not decide to do, but all of a sudden an idea is sparked. If you don't do any of that, in a lot of companies, we would just think of it as R&D. People, that's all they do is, and there have been times where within organizations, people are like, we're chasing everything. Okay. We are really focused on our core work. Are we doing these other things? And helping people understand that there is a vision behind it, okay? That it's about what, and if you do experiment, you come up with ideas, but there's something for me much more compelling. And that is sometimes you have to pivot as an organization,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to move fast. That's not the case most of the time. But when you're facing a crisis or another threat to an organization, you have to move fast. The people who tend to succeed in that are the people who practiced it. They understand that, we're an organization of change. We experiment. And then when we actually have to change, we can do it. And there have been a number of examples. I can think back when I was a school superintendent back in the 2007, 8, and the governor came out and said, we're slashing education budgets by 10% across the board, starting next month. When you've gone through exercises of, if we had to reduce cost here, or we want to reposition those dollars here, you're already doing those things. That exercise wasn't nearly as hard for us. Okay? Or you get to a pandemic that becomes an existential threat to your company, and you have to pivot fast. You don't have time. And one of the other things I've always believed from a leadership standpoint is, for me, understanding if time is on my side. Okay. I always think, how much time do I really have? Right? I'll give you, like, if you're a high school principal and the fire alarm goes off, you don't have a lot of time to think about other things. You deal with the crisis, you deal with it right now. Most of the time, you have time to think. And the more time you take, some people want a decision right now. And you have to resist that as a leader. Someone wants, I need a decision today. Do you really? Is that necessary that you have the decision today? I need time to think about this. We want to be decisive. Being decisive, and I think people confuse that. Making a split-second decision is not about being decisive. Right? It's about contemplating. It's about understanding the decision you're actually making. For me, decisiveness is when you make a decision, right? And you've made it. But it's not how quickly you can put a lot about it, and had to experience that a lot. So those situational leadership opportunities, they come about frequently. Okay? And working through that, listening to people, getting as much information, making decisions, but then realize made a mistake, okay? And acknowledging it. Listen, I messed up, okay? And as a result, we have to pivot again. Didn't mean to, but this is what happened. Okay? So anyway, those are just lessons I've learned, and I think and they stay with me.
You just did a great job defining how leadership and our society sees more productivity in trying and failing than they once did. Going back into my childhood 30, 40, 50 years ago, the view of failure was much different. A lot of lack of knowledge, a lot of benefit, to your point, in that setting and aspect. But one thing I wanted to build upon, you talked about the thought process on the got to have it now type thing. And I correlate that in this communication world today with all these avenues to communicate through texting or email or what have you. It's almost immediately that anything and everything that's sent to someone, the other person is sitting there like this with their phone waiting for that immediate response, when this isn't a life or death situation aspect. And that leads a bit to your point, indecisiveness in the decision they make, whether it's quick or not. But what I want to shift a little bit to and build on, you talk about the thought process. Dr. Bertram, your experience and your observations when it comes to on the opposite end of that, the overthinking aspect, and how that can bind an organization's opportunity to move forward.
Yeah, it really comes down to, it's a great question and great insight. And for many, I believe, it's the consequences of failure.
Mm.
And I think those consequences can come from a couple of different forms. One are just from the market itself and the outcomes. Like, you mess this up, this could be big. The other is how people treat failure. Okay? And for many, this is in the educational environment. Think about what we do. We have a class, whatever course subject it is, high school, college, elementary, and we give them assignments. And then we grade the assignments. We put a letter grade on a number of points. We put them in a grade book. We get to the end of it and we average we take those points and we average it, and we take this arbitrary grading scale and put a letter grade on. Okay? That's not the way the real world works. Okay? The real world doesn't, whether it's business or in research, you don't get penalized from where you started. You get rewarded from where you end and what you've learned through that. Could you imagine in a drug trial saying we learn nothing through failure? But in education, we're not set up that way. So we condition people to think about failure like that. But then I look at how our kids play video games. Right? That's where they learn to fail. In many cases, it's not school. They get on Fortnite and they get blown up. But what do? They strategize, they navigate, they collaborate, right? And they just try to get to the next level. If they get to the next level, we don't penalize them because it took them steps. Okay? They just get rewarded for the next level. And I have been thinking a lot about how do we create that kind of environment in education. Someone said to me recently, it's not a video game. No, it's not. It's much more consequential, which makes it even more important that we got to figure this out. Okay? And we can figure it out in a gaming environment, but we can't figure it out in the environment that matters the most for our kids. And that's where I think we can just do better than that.
It seems inside out in that regard. To your point, I believe the letter grading system is so disconnected from reality, and it just really distracts from the real opportunity for students to get feedback, give feedback, and really grow effectively in that regard, because of my grade should have been this or that, or should have been here type thing in that focal point. So thank you for alluding to that piece.
Yes, I agree with you on the grading and letter grades. We try to put a letter grade on everything. Sometime the whole state, and this was happening in Indiana, and then it was moving across the country. Actually, I think started in Florida, where we're going to grade schools on their performance.
Mm.
Okay? And I understood the desire to do it. Okay? I just thought we're trying to put a letter grade on something that's incredibly more complex than this grading scale. Okay? And say here that people would say to me, people understand letter grades. I said they may understand a letter grade, but they just don't know what goes into it.
Mm.
It's like you're in a classroom, like what a B, what does it really mean in terms of learning? Okay? We just say it's above average. Well, above average of what? Okay? What does it mean in terms of learner outcomes? But we do that in a lot of things. We grade restaurants based on how many health violations they have. We put letter grades on companies based on all kinds of factors. And we do that, and we've oversimplified a very complex system, and particularly when it comes to student learning. I would just argue, let's just get rid of these grades, okay? Just get rid of them. Why do we do this to our kids? Why do we have to have grades? You know, things like transcript. We're transcripting a final outcome of a course versus what students are actually learning.
Mm.
Okay? And then ask someone this on a resume. Okay? Do you put every failure you've had on a resume? Okay? Knowing that you've had them? Every project that went bad for you? No. But we do that on a transcript for kids, and we put it on a permanent transcript. You messed up here. It doesn't mean it should haunt you forever. Okay? There's no chance of correcting it. Okay? Why would we do that to our kids? And that's where I just fundamentally I question, like, what could that system look like? I've talked to university educators and presidents and had this discussion a lot. And we talk about transcripts, and I'm like, why do you need them? It shows us what they've done. It really doesn't. It shows you what letter grade they got in a particular course. It doesn't show how they got there or what it really means. You're looking for a GPA that may not matter at all. Okay? What we're trying to do is understand what you've learned, what you know. Okay? And then we're simplify this by giving a single test, and all of a sudden that's going to do it. So I've been thinking, like, what does a portfolio really look like around student work, student learning? But then I hear people say, well, that's going to be too hard to analyze, right, and to evaluate. We want something that's simple, something that's fast, something that just gives us a number. And we're saying this GPA is on this student, but it may be totally disconnected of what that student's capable of doing. These are all philosophical things, but there are places, people who are doing this stuff, have gotten rid of GPAs, class ranks. You know, they've gone to mastery-based learning and project-based learning. They're measuring growth instead of averaging points. There are people doing this. We just need to do it at scale.
I like that. I'm on board with that. And Dr. Bertram, we're looking around the corner at the end of this episode. And before we get away, I want to talk about you. What's next for you? And whether it's venture or personal growth, what's something that you're looking to expand your strength with?
Yeah, thank you for asking that, Kevin. I feel like I'm a lifelong learner. I do things. I'm a lot about industries that I didn't know a lot about. I've been studying a lot about AI and things like ChatGPT and Bard and other language models, what that could look like, the implications for education and for us just as a human race, and the transformative nature of AI. And I really believe it is one of the most significant things that we see in our lifetime. And the adoption rate and what it means from an education standpoint. And I had some people say to me recently, but ChatGPT, students will just cheat. I'm like, well, listen, they've been cheating for years, right? This isn't going to be a new thing, right? But how do we use this to enhance learning? And there's so many ways, so many applications. So I've been paying a lot of attention to that. And then I'm really focused on career learning for students and how can we create something at scale to give students access, exposure to the world of work, where they can make better decisions. And so always learning new things, always thinking about how we can improve things for our students, and not just necessarily in the US, but how can we do this globally? Those are things I'm working on. I'm excited. I'm energized about the possibilities. And, for the first time though, I've often talked about entrepreneurship and the importance of it, and what it has meant to our economy and to our country and globally. And I had just never done it myself. Right? And so stepping away with this belief, I remember sitting with my sons about 3 years ago and telling them, listen, I'm ready to go do this, and I'm going to go do it. Right? And even for them, they believed in it, but it was also like, okay, it's time. But it's been a fun journey. It's been hard, incredibly hard, but also exhilarating and pretty exciting. But I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you, Kevin. You do great work. I think you're providing such a great service to people, and I just love your view and your hospitality. So, but thank you for having me.
It's my honor. It's just a privilege, and the passion, the consistency, the passion you have for that education piece reminds me of in many states around the country today, in the U.S., maybe globally, the shortages of talented teachers, individuals even wanted to be in education today. For those out there who may question, is that really something I want to do? What would you say to them?
Yeah, it's a great question. And let me preface my statement about what I would say to them. We have done teaching, from a teaching profession, I believe, as policymakers in this country, a great disservice to the profession. And when I was in South Korea, I was on an assignment there with the U.S. Department of State. And I was going to visiting different schools, universities, and I would ask a similar question everywhere I went. And that was, so where do you get your teachers? And I started to believe like this was a national response, right? But here it was. If you are in the top 20%, you may get the privilege of teaching our children. In America, you can drive down a highway and see a sign, a billboard that says, want to teach? When can you start? That's the difference. Teaching is an incredibly important profession in our society, and we should treat them that way. We should get beyond the conversations about teacher compensation and just compensate them, right? Compete for talent, just like any other company, right? But invite them back. Let's pay teachers what they deserve. And I do believe we can change that trajectory pretty quickly. Okay? The second, though, we have to change the conditions of teaching. A lot of teachers teach, okay? Not try to get everyone to go into this construct that is so restrictive that doesn't make it fun. What I would say to prospective teachers is that there are very few professions, even with its challenges, perhaps even with pay, in which you have such an amazing opportunity to influence the lives of people for generations. The kids who will come back to you years later and you meet on the street or in a restaurant and they say, you inspired me, even when you didn't know what you had done. You don't remember, but they do because you changed their lives. There aren't many professions that give us that kind of opportunity. Teaching, education just happens to be one of them. So from that standpoint, yeah, it's a great profession. Right? And there was a great study that came out. It was actually in the Harvard Business Review. And the cover story was how to create jobs that people love. Okay? In this research, it came to the conclusion that most jobs, people don't love all their job. Like, what percentage do you actually have to love? It turns out that's only like 20%. If you love 20% of your job, it'll keep you in the profession. Okay? I have to believe that the opportunity to influence the lives of children in the way that we can in education will far exceed 20%. Right? Just give them the opportunity to have those kind of relationships, to build student confidence, to build opportunity for them. And I think we can overcome some of the challenges we have. And it's been fun. You asked me a moment ago, I just close on this, but I've enjoyed, I'm getting ready to release another book. And one of the things I had done, I wrote my first book in 2014, then I wrote another book called Dream Differently, Candid Advice for America's Students in 2017. I'm going to release Dream Differently 2.0 coming up and hopefully soon. And the whole idea around this is helping students see things a little differently, to think about their future in a different way, and helping them understand how important education is. And the last thing I would say from an education standpoint, when I go out and talk at schools or with companies, we have to make our work relevant. I think that's the way to inspire kids. Help them understand the relevancy of what they're learning. We can't convince them that they have to learn math because it's going to be on the test, or even because you need to know this body of knowledge because that's what educated people do and what they have to know. The reality is, teach them that this is going to matter for your life, right? These are the real situations in which you're going to have to apply this knowledge, and then give them a chance to practice. And then don't hold it against them because they don't get it the first time, okay? Give them a chance to keep growing, keep improving, keep learning, inspire them. Okay? And let's figure out how to not penalize them. There was Ben Zander was with the Boston Philharmonic. He wrote a book called The Art of Possibility. And in this book, he said that he was teaching in the conservatory, and all these students, they were just so focused on getting good grades. And that's not the goal here. The goal is to create great music. Right? You're all focused on grades. So he walked into class one day, asked him to get out a piece of paper, and he goes, listen, forget your grades. Everyone has an A in it. You have an A. Okay? I just want you to write down on a piece of paper what you're going to do to keep it. Okay? He said, I'm just going to hold you accountable to what you say you're going to do. You do that, you get an A. Don't worry about it. You're not competing with each other. Okay? And he said it just totally shifted the perspective of the entire class. And that's what I would like to see in education. Okay? That agreement of what they need to learn, how we can help them do it in a much lower risk environment. So, thanks, Kevin.
Dr. Bertram, wiser words never said in my time. Thank you for that. I appreciate you, sir. You're going to continue to have great success. Thank you for the leadership example you are. Thank you for what you've meant to education and what you're going to continue to mean to education. From the bottom of my heart, it's an honor to have you.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Wow. You don't need to hear from me after Dr. Bertram's summary of our 2 weeks together. What wonderful words of wisdom. If you would like to use this, review this, check out the YouTube site. It'll be there. It's stored. There's a lot to take away. And if you're thinking about education, there's a lot of opportunity and need we have for you. Because remember, influence is key to leadership. It's key to the development of our children. It's key to development of self, development of others. And we all influence someone. Why not the student in the classroom trying to decide and define their career? Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you. God bless.